off with the World of Warcraft business. I then came to Portland to do data entry before learning about Epicode as another code school here. I graduated from there in September 2017, and a month later I was hired at Nike as an application engineer. 9 months later, I left Nike to go to a cloud consulting company, and then about 9 months after that, I started my own cloud consulting company. So that would be Serverless Guru. And what Serverless Guru does, and kind of a cool history timeline, back in March 2018 is when it was officially founded. So it started off as like just being like a blog, and I was going to release training courses. Around December 2018, 9 months later, that was when I first got my first few clients, and I actually incorporated them as an LLC, all those things. And then in January 2019, we became an AWS consulting partner. In June 2019, we became the #1 serverless Inc. dev partner. So if you go to serverless.com/partners, we'll show up at the top of that, which is pretty cool. And then October 2019, launched a paid professional serverless course. It's in early access right now. If anybody wants early access for free, just let me know. I can add you to the course. So kind of what Serverless Guru does is we help on every step of your serverless journey. So working with companies to help them migrate from an existing architecture to serverless, helping them develop applications within their team, or training their team to basically have these skills internally.
I think the mic is off, sorry. Oh. It's just a little switch on the top.
Nice. Good?
Minor technical difficulty.
Okay.
Alright. Awesome.
And then, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect, thanks.
So what is AWS, right? So AWS kind of kicked off the serverless movement back in 2014. So we'll get into that. How can it help your career? So what type of options does this allow for you, like opportunities? And where can you start? So Amazon Web Services is the industry-leading cloud computing platform. They have services to build enterprise applications like web, mobile, etc. Meaning like if you wanted to hook into a satellite in space, AWS has like services for that. If you want to store images because you're building an Instagram clone, there's services for that too. All the way to like login authentication, databases, the whole full suite. AWS is also nice. Every cloud provider has this now, but there's a 12-month free tier for all new accounts. So you can basically sign up, stay within their free tier limit. You won't get charged anything. Something to point out, Google Cloud has this, Azure has this, IBM has this. It's pretty standard now. This is kind of what you get with free tier access. So for instance, 12-month free, there's some like always free products where it's just a cap every month and it resets. For instance, Amazon RDS, this is for like MySQL or Postgres databases. So you get 750 hours of that per month. Amazon S3, this would be file storage, images, documents, PDFs, things like that, slideshows. You can get 5 gigs of that, which is a fair amount. Every gig after that is like, a fraction of $1 or something. Amazon EC2, this would be running like an Express application or Next.js or something like that, whereas you're doing like server-side rendering or just running like any server for any thing that you can think of. You get 750 hours of that. And then the big one to point out here is AWS Lambda. When you talk about serverless, most of the time people are talking about a specific concept called cloud functions. And so what cloud functions are is basically a way to run a single 30-line snippet of code without having to spin up an entire server, do networking, set up all these like security groups, all this complexity. It takes it away. You just basically write your function that says like hello world, and that's, you throw it on AWS Lambda, you execute it, and then now you have something running without any of the overhead that used to be there. So how can it help your career? Well, there's a high market demand for developers with AWS knowledge. If you couple AWS knowledge with serverless knowledge, that's setting up for the next like 5 years, right? So that's really big. Path to higher positions and higher salary. The reason I was hired at Nike out of code school is because I had 2 AWS certifications, and I started a small startup with a couple of graduates there, where we were actually building like a DynamoDB interface, so a NoSQL like web UI, so you could actually see your database. If you've worked with like MySQL Workbench or pSQL or something like that, it's just a way of visualizing the data inside your database. And so based on that knowledge of actually building out a platform like that with AWS and serverless, I was able to go through a lot of the initial conversation with the tech lead there, which was super cool. And that was a big advantage that I had over some of the other graduates that I went with, just because there was like the code school aspect plus another aspect. Learn valuable skills, building complex architecture. So what would be a good idea, and what I kind of did initially, is I chose like a target. Like, I want to build this platform to visualize data for this database. And then I had to learn about like authentication and how to set that up on AWS, how to do like hosting. And so it gave me a really solid like foundation. It also gave me something to talk about that I was confident in. And then career growth opportunity in the cloud. So cloud computing first kicked off around like 2006. And from there, it took about like till 2014, 2015 for the entire industry, the whole software industry, to kind of pick up speed with it. And now it's, when people talk about building applications, they're talking about building cloud applications. Obviously, people still run applications on like data centers and things like that. But for the most part, cloud is kind of the first thing that people look at now. So you'll see now in job descriptions, a lot of times they say AWS or GCP or Microsoft Azure. And this would be kind of where that's going. So AWS plus developer equals what? Well, cloud engineers in Portland, Oregon, and this is outdated, but I'm sure you could find the exact salary. It put an average salary of like 100,000. It says up there like 74,000 to 128,000. Obviously, it's only 37 profiles here, but this is in line with like what Nike kind of pays. So what's interesting about this is that this is a way that you can kind of take this development knowledge, couple it with cloud knowledge, and then have a really strong career trajectory to go towards, which is nice. And just to touch on this a little bit more, I didn't actually mention AWS plus developer, what that equals, right? So imagine you're a front-end developer. If you use something like AWS and Serverless, you can end up doing all the back-end as well, just by doing a couple of clicks of buttons, or you write like some very simple file that'll then create your whole back-end, connect it all together. There's things like AWS Amplify now, which does this. There's things like Firebase, if y'all use that, that does this as well. And so now you can be a ReactJS developer, Angular developer, Vue developer, and you can actually leverage the full power of the cloud without having to know all of the underlying systems. And so when I talk about AWS plus developer, I'm talking less of like spinning up servers and maintaining databases, and more like doing modern software development.
What they call cloud engineer, things like Grayscale, I'm not sure it's the same thing. So what you do, if you were working for Oracle, Azure, IBM, AWS, or these guys, and you had a full-time job helping thousands and thousands of people keep their stuff up in the cloud, I would normally run that would be cloud engineer as opposed to the DevOps guy. You're working for those companies and help. They are doing things in the cloud. So you might be cloud engineer, helping people, helping anything else. Most of us, our pay scale would be higher, or would be in tools that we use in the cloud.
Yeah, so it's a good point. So cloud engineer, typically, this is kind of a combination of two different concepts. So cloud engineer traditionally has been like creating servers, containers, helping on the DevOps front, creating CI/CD pipelines, doing things to basically move the applications forward, and then you have developers that are working in the code, and then somebody's handling the deployment process. What we're actually seeing is this kind of like singularity point where the cloud engineering and the development are combining into one. And so this may be somewhat outdated, at least in the salary scale. But what I would say is like the focus that I'm trying to get at is like we're moving towards this point where the lines, there's no more like clear distinctions between these different areas. And I feel like, based on the context I've had over the past couple years, that when this stuff happens and when people are starting to move in the direction of combining both front-end development and back-end development through these fully managed services, we're going to have to do much less cloud engineering because Google has 1,000 engineers that work on making sure that their containers run seamlessly, right? And at the end of the day, like the kind of goal of being developers, right, is not actually like writing. I mean, it's writing code, but that's not the point, right? The point of being software developers is building a product, right? I feel like that gets lost sometimes. And so the idea of being a cloud engineer, it's very cool to work with those technologies, but it's also cool to deliver a product 10 times faster, right? And so it's not really mentioned too much, and thanks for pointing out kind of the distinction there. But yeah, so I'll kind of show a little bit of like what does this mean to do some like front end development mixed in with some back end fully managed services. But first off, if you want to get into AWS, create a free account and break stuff. So you can obviously turn it off. You're not going to be billed. Google how to build X with AWS and then follow a tutorial. It could be the same for GCP, for Google, or Microsoft Azure. This would be like how to build a website, how to build a database, how to build a data pipeline, or something like that. Prepare for an AWS certification. So Google is now rolling out certifications, and based on the pay scale stuff, Google Cloud certifications are also paying extremely high. Azure certifications are starting to get up there as well. And that's partly due to the fact that the US government just signed a contract with Microsoft Azure for like $10 billion over AWS, which is kind of big. And so they're starting to become more of a market with Microsoft Azure lately. Here's kind of a breakdown of AWS certifications. There's a few more now, but on the foundational level, these are the ones that you can do initially to get started. The associate ones, these are kind of your like first step into actually having a certification on AWS. And the professional ones, these are the higher tier, bigger enterprise companies where you're doing just like straight up cloud engineering. They're going to be looking for things like the solutions architect professional or the DevOps engineer professional. If you're working in a very niche like AWS networking stack and you are the AWS networking person at your company or on a team, depending on the company size, certified advanced networking, and also big data if you're working with things like machine learning and all that stuff.
Can I take a picture of that?
Yeah.
And would you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
As far as like just DevOps, which is like DevSecOps, like direction,
Yeah, so what we've been seeing is that companies are starting to sunset a lot more of their existing AWS things or applications. They're sunsetting databases, moving to a different architecture that's like fully managed, or they're sunsetting servers for a fully managed like cloud function setup. And they're also sunsetting things like if they have like API proxies, they're moving that over. A really basic example of that would be like, think of an Apache server. So the Apache server runs your front-end code, but now you can use things like static web hosting, which I'll show you in a second, and then you don't need that anymore. And so if you think about all of the engineering work that it takes to build an Apache server, make sure that it scales out to all the different traffic, make sure you have monitoring on it, make sure you have security on it, make sure all the security groups are matched up so that people that are accessing it are locked down if it's internal or not. And then you have something like static web hosting, where it's basically tossing HTML files onto a Google Drive, and then your website's up with like HTTPS and all those different things. And so that would be like kind of the direction that I'm seeing.
As far as the trends,
Yeah.
I mean, like people are sunsetting those systems in AWS, like moving inside of Amazon into more fully managed services,
Yeah.
or is it a trend away from AWS?
Oh, no, there's a trend within AWS and with other cloud providers is basically taking their existing stuff that they move to AWS or to another cloud provider and then finding ways to lower the overhead. And so this is something, we've done since the very beginning of, software, right? It's like, I talked to the CEO of Cloudability and talked about how, like, cloud was just like, the reason why we even have cloud computing is because, people didn't want to pay for servers themselves, right? And so we're starting to just see like every iteration that's happened over the past like 30 years or plus, right, has been about lowering the overhead cost. So fully managed services is like the next thing where that goes to. So here's some certification screenshots. The developer associate, this is the first one that I got in 2017. It was much easier back then, I've been told. They've updated it with some more like hard requirements. So I would say take the solutions architect associate first, which seems backwards. But this one, both of these have really good certification courses on a cloud.guru. Not to be confused with serverless guru, would have no connection there. And both of these courses, if you go through it, it's about like 13 hours, and it's going to give you a pretty strong background into AWS, the services that you need to work with. And of course, certifications when you're moving into a new area like AWS or anything else, like at least on the cloud side, it really does confirm that knowledge, and it's less of like being in college and taking a math test where it's like, solve this equation and it's very isolated. This is like you're hired at a company, they have 1,000 people coming, or they have 10,000 people coming into their site. They're seeing 500 errors. How do you debug it, right? And like those are the type of questions that are on these tests. And so when you pass it, you can have some feeling of confidence that you actually understand and you can probably do a job at a company.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So on this developer certification, right? Is it like they measure on a certain language, or they measure like how good you are developing software on Amazon services?
Yeah, so it'd be about like best practices according to Amazon. Less about, there is no language questions about like Node.js or Python or something like that. However, it'll be running a static website or connecting to a database, what these services are, how they interact with each other, and then it's some situation-based questions of like you have an Apache server and you need to find a serverless solution to it. Here's AWS S3 static hosting, and that might be a question on the test.
I assume that the top one would be the preferable choice to go for first.
Yeah, so I would say if you just want to pass something faster, the solutions architect is in its updated form is apparently easier than the developer one. Although the developer one is probably going to be more in line with the skills and the knowledge that you want coming out of like a code school or being like a front end or back end developer. So the solutions architect gets more into the people that are like writing the architecture diagrams, working on like team leads, all those things. So it's good to definitely know this, but developer is going to give you like the practical hands-on stuff.
Are these the two certifications that you mentioned having at the end of
Yes. Yeah.
So, not to interrupt.
Yeah.
No.
What I started off with, if I were to say, well, I'm developer associate or solutions architect associate?
Yeah, so I would say start with solutions architect associate. This is something like if I go back to this one here. So if you notice, every single one of these on the bottom is cloud practitioner. So if you want to just technically this is a certification, although it's not. They don't give you like a badge and all the formal stuff. But if you want to just get your hands wet in it and just go forward, this cloud practitioner one is going to be the easiest, simple, straightforward, step one, and then after that, solutions architect associate. The sysops one on the far right, that one's more based around database configuration, private or virtual private cloud setups, security groups, that have some networking stuff, and also cost optimization. So I would put that one as the third one that you do. But the solutions architect and then the developer, and then I would go for the sysops after that. So, but if you want step one, go cloud practitioner, and there's courses on a cloud.guru where you just load up. It's $30 a month, and they have, I think they announced they have 1 million students that are on there. So there's 1 million people that are taking AWS classes from a cloud.guru, and so the threads are really rich with information to help you pass. Yeah, I'll definitely share the slides out on Meetup. Yeah. Yeah, so focus on the hands-on labs from a cloud.guru or Linux Academy. Linux Academy is $50 a month, but they have a Cloud.Guru's course is 13 hours. Linux Academy's course, the equivalent of it, is like 60 hours. So if you want to go way deep, Linux Academy. Otherwise, a Cloud.Guru will get you most of the way. Ignore the pricing for each service. So a lot of the preparation on a Cloud.Guru, they talk about you have this many EC2 hours, this much storage, costs a fraction of a dollar. You don't need to remember any of that stuff to actually pass it. Read the forums on a Cloud.Guru. So this is a really big one. There's forum threads on people that just went and took the test, and then they're talking about their experience. There's forums on every single video where they talk about questions that they had around it. And so you can kind of learn from all these people, which would be probably the best way to kind of concrete all this knowledge, because they'll go, that video didn't make any sense to me, the verb, like the way, the vocabulary that was just used didn't make sense, and then someone will reply to them, and then so on. And then read the FAQs. So kind of this would be like the last thing that I do before going to take the test. And that would be because these FAQs are, they're written by AWS. AWS made the certifications. So they ask very straightforward questions that actually show up on the exams. So when you read the forums or you watch the Cloud.Guru videos, they'll tell you the type of things that show up on the test. AWS S3. And so then you can go read the AWS S3 FAQ off AWS's website, and you can learn all their bullet points that are the most important to them. And then finally, apply your skills to new skills to a real project. So that would be like building a website, building a database, connecting them together, building an API. And we're going to get into that right after this slide. So a Cloud.Guru, first certification resource, Linux Academy. And if you can't find it, because AWS has a lot of different web portals, it's just aws.amazon.com/certification. And there's like 2 different testing centers that you can go to. I would look at both, because one will say, oh, the closest one's in like Eugene. And then the other one will say, oh, you can go to like PCC. So just check both of those. Cool. So with that, we can switch over and we can do a demo about how to deploy AWS S3 website. So for this, I'm going to use create React app. And I'm just going to copy these commands in. Yeah, I might want to. Okay, y'all still can't see that. At least we can change it white. Is that better? Yeah, that's good. Okay. So we're just going to copy these commands. So what this is doing is just creating all the boilerplate for a ReactJS app using create React app, which is a very popular way to just spin up a quick ReactJS app without a lot of input. So it'll give you like build scripts and all this stuff just right out of the box.
Quick question about an earlier slide. You mentioned ignoring the pricing. What do you mean? Like,
Yeah.
Because you mentioned there's like a monthly pricing to access like courses.
Oh, ignoring the prices on the videos, they'll talk about some service, and then they'll go into like, this is how much it costs per minute, or this is how much it costs per hour,
Okay.
and so that, yeah, ignore that part. Okay, so we got that up. Now we're going to CD into it. So now we have our folder here. It's got our node modules, which are npm dependencies. We've got a source folder, which actually has our ReactJS code in it. And then we have our package.json here. This package.json has a build command. So you basically can just run npm run build. It's going to basically build up these source files here, and then we can actually upload that to AWS. So you see a build folder got created here. that out. And in here, it's kind of minified things. If we opened up, let's see, like for instance, the index.html is just on a single line. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in here, like a robots.txt for SEO. So now what we can do is let's switch over to AWS S3 and create a bucket. Call this S3 Tech Academy. So these are just default settings. I'm kind of just going to skip through the screens a little bit. There is one that you got to pay attention to, which is block all public access. This is turned on by default, but it'll actually stop us from hosting a website because if we block all access, people can't get to it. Then we can hit create bucket. And then now we're going to upload these files. The way that I've done this in the past is I've uploaded them manually, which is fun. So we can do that as well. Let me see. Desktop, sandbox, demo. Actually. There we go. So we have our index.html up there. I'm actually going to add the rest of these files in as well. It doesn't let you like upload an entire folder, which is still a really weird thing since S3 is like 10 years old. We can try again because maybe they updated it. But no, you can't actually upload a folder. So with that,
And then no like interface to
Plug in there.
like push projects to bucket.
there is, yeah. So there is a CLI form, which is much easier than the way that I'm doing it. But yeah, I'm going to do it this way to show the power of automation after we're done,
Yeah.
but also the painstaking boringness factor of this. So as these things upload, there is a public permission that we have to add to these. So we can do this automatically when we upload it later using the CLI, but you have to hit make public. And this is just going to open up access for the bucket, at least for these files inside of it. And we can do the same thing on outside here, make public. We'll create one more folder called CSS.
Without interrupting too much, but
Yeah.
does AWS allow us like a trial period?
Yeah, you get a 12-month free tier. Yeah. And so you'll be able to like create stuff and do all that without being billed.
What is the billing like after that? If you maintain after 1 year, what is the billing like?
Yeah, so for stuff like, if you're making something like an EC2 instance, which is a virtual machine, that would be, it could be $4 a month, all the way up to $10,000 a month if you're using like some super powerful machine learning instance. So definitely don't leave stuff running. That would be the biggest one. Work with caution. Okay. Last one's media. Okay, awesome. So we got through that. So now we have all of our files up here from our ReactJS app that we just built. However, we haven't turned on static load hosting. So this bucket is what's called a bucket. It's not actually able to be accessed by people. So we have to turn that on. If you go to the tab properties here, you can see static load hosting. And so it'll give you a URL automatically that links to this bucket. And then we can tell it that when people go to this URL, then open the index.html file, and that's how everything kind of connects together. So we'll say use this bucket to host a website. And because this is a single page application, everything gets routed through the index.html, we put index.html for the error document as well. If you were writing a generic, just only HTML site, you can actually have an error.html. That'll just be like if somebody goes to a path that doesn't exist and show this page. However, our React app is actually going to handle stuff like that. So,
How much more complicated is it if it's HTTPS?
yeah, so like up there, HTTP. So there is a URL that gets generated for you for S3. This one's just HTTP. It's a different format though for S3, but you can look that. You can definitely look that up. There's also another service called CloudFront. CloudFront allows you to put something in front of the S3 bucket, and then there's a service called AWS Certification Manager, and then you can create an SSL cert and kind of connect everything together. So, yeah. Okay, so now we have our bucket up. We can check it out. Build a little resource, quote, forbidden, some JavaScript files. Let's just go back and make sure everything's set up. Make public. So it should work, which would be surprising if it did work. Because the big thing here is that we haven't actually given, there's like one more step where we have to actually give it permission. So luckily, if you're watching this, you're like, hey, this is a ton of information. We wrote an article about this on the Serverless Guru Medium called like Deploy ReactJS app with S3 static hosting. It will go through everything, like creating an AWS account, logging into the AWS console, finding S3, downloading the user credentials so you can actually connect your local computer to AWS, permissions, all these things, all the way down to installing like the AWS CLI, installing Node, using Create React App, which we just did, and then setting up the S3 bucket, and creating the buckets. And there's one more thing down here, so it's called the bucket policy. So this bucket policy actually opens up access to the internet to our bucket. So we're going to do that real quick. So we paste this in here. We can then swap out the example S3 ARN for our own.
Did you, when it said like enter DNS applicable name or whatever, when you named
Oh,
this
yeah,
bucket,
the bucket.
did you name it S3 something?
Yeah, I
or
did.
is that the prefix?
Yeah. If we look back at that, so yeah, so right here we just got public access for this. So if we go back to the website, refresh it, looks like it's still not working, which is not good. Hit demo jobs.
And while you're trying to fix that, you said that that article that you,
Yeah.
so how do you, what should I do with that?
Yeah, so the best way to do that would be to go to medium.com/serverlessguru. And there'll be all of our articles in here. So I just recently wrote one about how to unit test Node.js without getting off topic. And then there's a whole bunch more articles in here as well about like serverless migrations and how to hack the Medium account. Let me open up access here. So as you can see, doing this manually in the console is not a good way to do this. Okay, CSS main bundle. Alright, so let's switch to the CLI part of this. We'll just jump straight ahead. So after we did this manually, ideally it would have worked, but we got the permissions wrong at some point. So what we can do is we can actually save the whole build folder just by running like one command. So we can switch over to our terminal, and we'll put this command out here, which is part of the T. So we can run AWS S3 sync, and then build S3. This would be the path to our bucket name. And then the ACL is public read, which then opens up these files publicly. So let's go ahead and do that. And we'll add a profile on here. Not here actually. Switch out the bucket name, the one that we created. S3 Techpack demo. Okay, so now we're seeing a whole bunch of stuff upload. So let's go ahead and switch back and refresh. In the ideal world, that just fixed all of our problems. And it did. And we're up. So now we have our website running, and I figured out what the problem was. We didn't create a static folder. So that was a missing folder. I call it the break. So what we can see here is that this was our app locally that we had. And it's rendering at this URL. You can go to that, you can send it to someone. And then we can go back locally, and we can go into the source folder. Just say like, hello from Stephanie. And we can run npm run build. That's going to rebuild our project. And then after that, we can just run the last command. One more time. And if we switch back, we can see the change. So there's our deployment process. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. The other thing that we can do is we can just kill all these files as well. And now all of our hard work and that painstaking like 3 minutes is gone. And then now if we refresh the app, there's nothing there, 404 not found, which makes sense because there's no index.html. And then we can go back, rerun that upload command. And we can see that in S3, all the files are back, and the 404 page is gone. And so we're back up again. So this is a cool way that you can kind of demo some stuff, play around with it. There are some other CLI tools that you can use which do some of this for you. I mentioned like Firebase and AWS Amplify. Both AWS Amplify, obviously for AWS, Google Firebase for Google, but both of them do the same thing. If you're trying to achieve something like simple like this, they can just jumpstart you through that whole process. So you don't have to manually create the S3 bucket and do the permissions like we did. Yeah.
This might sound like a silly question, but can Firebase actually communicate with AWS?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you can. We've done a project before for a client where we built the authentication on Google with Firebase, and then we actually had a cloud function running on Google that was communicating to AWS, and that was because they're in this weird hybrid thing where they were trying to POC new stuff with existing stuff, and the existing stuff was in a private AWS, what's called Virtual Private Cloud. And so making that open up across the internet to Google wasn't something that they could do. So they basically just routed the communication over to AWS and then to the private database that they have. So it can definitely be done, but I wouldn't recommend, just choose one and go with it. Yeah.
A little fun.
Yeah. So back to this. That would be the demo part of this. If you're interested in learning more, which I definitely recommend, we have a YouTube channel. On Serverless Guru on YouTube. We've got a developer named Luke Benke, and he is like a AppSync hero at this point. So AppSync is basically fully managed GraphQL. So GraphQL and running APIs made with GraphQL is actually a pretty tall task. But AWS AppSync, which is a service that AWS offers, kind of wraps up all this functionality for you. And so if you want to learn how to build like a GraphQL API with a database and connect it to your ReactJS app, a team member named Luke on my team, he built like a 30-minute video for it, and it's just like end-to-end functionality. We also have a training site, so those AWS AppSync videos that I just mentioned are also on our training site at training.serverlessguru.com. Then we have Serverless Zero to Paid Professional. That one's the one that's in early access. I've got like 88 videos up currently. We have all the code for the course. We're just like filming and editing still, so there'll be more stuff coming out in that. And that course will go from like first starting with AWS to building an API manually to then building out an API with automation to then building a front end to then hosting the front end similarly. What we just did, connecting all these things together, it should be super sweet when it's finished. So definitely hit me up afterwards if y'all want access.
Does it also build a database?
Yeah, we'll build a database in there with like NoSQL, connect to it, all that stuff.
What NoSQL?
We use DynamoDB, which is the AWS service. So it's basically fully managed NoSQL. Whereas if you're familiar with like MongoDB, you usually have to have a server running for that. DynamoDB with AWS's assistance, obviously, they manage the server for you automatically. So you're just basically putting data into it and getting data out, and that's your only concern.
Could it work with MongoDB?
You can transition stuff from MongoDB to DynamoDB. There are actual I want to say there's automation tools that actually can allow you to map those values. A lot of people actually have migrated from MongoDB to DynamoDB strictly because the cost factor. There's a service on AWS that does fully manage MongoDB, and the minimum cost per month is $200, whereas DynamoDB could be $1 a month or less, right? And so, yeah. And then we also have a Medium publication, which is where that article initially was posted. We have about 65 articles at the moment, so if you're interested in, diving into a whole bunch of different stuff, I've done some series on there where it's part 1, part 3 or something about how to build an app. And I also have a podcast, so interesting enough, talkingserverless.io. I did a podcast episode right before I came over here with the solutions architect at serverless.com, just talking about the future of serverless and kind of what he's working on. I've also done some stuff with the CEO of a big serverless monitoring company, and we're hoping to roll out these episodes for the podcast, mid next week. So if you're interested in that, and that's it. So that's all I've got. So thank you very much for having me. Listen to me rant on about this. Looks like this line is a little bit broken. But yeah, so if you want to contact me, you can message me at ryan@serverlessguru.com or LinkedIn at ryanjonesIRL, which I'm going to modify this text to be black.
Did you create any services to be available on Amazon Marketplace?
No, so I haven't made any stuff on the AWS Marketplace, but there's a lot of the people that we work with that have monitoring companies. They release stuff on there.
Into monitoring?
Yeah, the serverless monitoring front. Yeah. If y'all are familiar with New Relic, they actually just bought a serverless monitoring company as of 4 days ago or something. That company name was IO Pipes. And so, yeah, so now New Relic is coming out with New Relic serverless monitoring, or they're calling it New Relic serverless. So, if you learn serverless development, you could work at New Relic. Who knows? And they're right down the road. And then also, if you're interested in a job, I can't obviously guarantee anything, but I would love to get some information from you because we're actively growing, and we're always looking for people that have some skill set that would be useful to help grow the company and also provide value to our clients. So.
Cool. Cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks guys for coming out. Drop some people on the way. Feel free to hang out for a few minutes as we're cleaning up. Again, we have some outreach surveys, so if you want to see something specific in the future or you have some feedback, we'd love to hear from you. But otherwise, have a good day. Thank you.